Good evening. I am Jen Gettleman, and I'm the Deafblind consultant on the Wisconsin Deafblind Technical Assistance Project, or WDB TAP. And so here with me tonight are Michelle Klein from Project Reach, Megan Burgess from the Missouri Deafblind Technical Assistance Project, and Becky Lambert from the Delta Gamma Center. We would just like to thank you for joining us today for the Charge Educational Checklist presentation. So before we get started, I just wanted to go over a few logistical details. This presentation will be recorded and will be available next week for on-demand access for those who couldn't make it, or if you want to share it with your educational teams. We're hoping to get both the professional and the parent one posted and on available for families and professionals. And like Michelle said, this is being captioned. So if you need captions, please feel free to just click on the closed captions button at the bottom, and you should be able to access the captions that way. As questions come up, please feel free to type them in the chat. Michelle will be reading those to Lily, and Lily will answer them as we go. We will also have time at the end of the presentation for questions and discussions. And then earlier this week, I believe maybe yesterday, Jenny Hudson-Stanek shared a resource folder via email. So in this folder is a document with a list of links for the state deafblind projects. Some of you indicated your child was not on the state deafblind project or you were unsure. So if you wanted more information, that is in that folder. Also in the folder is today's presentation, the charge checklist, and then other information about the Wisconsin, Illinois, and Missouri deafblind projects, as well as the Delta Gamma Center. We will put that link into the resource folder in the chat now. And that link, in case you don't have access to the chat, it is all in lowercase letters. And the link is https://bit.ly/parent-resources and then the number 2. And then lastly, we will be doing a few polls throughout the presentation. The poll should pop up on your screen, allowing you to click on the answer. These polls will also be read aloud so that everyone has access to them. If you are unable to access the poll, please feel free to just comment in the chat section with your answer. So I am going to go ahead and launch that first poll. And that first poll has 3 questions. So the first question says, have you heard of or used the Charge Educational Checklist before? And so the possible answers are yes, no, or not sure. The second question is, how old is your child or children with Charge syndrome? And so the available options are 0 to 3 years old, 4 to 6 years old, 7 to 9 years old, 10 to 13 years old, 14 to 17 years old, 18 to 20 years old, or an adult. And then the last question is, does your child have an IEP? So I'm going to leave that poll up. And I'm going to just begin while that poll is up to introduce Lily Slavin. So Lily is a school psychology doctoral candidate at Central Michigan University. She has been a member of the Charge Syndrome Research Lab led by Tim Hartshorn since 2016. Her research interests include educational needs, supports, and experiences of students with Charge syndrome. She has presented at Charge conferences in Norway, Germany, Florida, Texas, and Cincinnati. Lily has also worked as a summer intern at Deafblind Central and is a summer research fellow at Cincinnati Children's Hospital with the CHARGE team. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Lily, and just please remember, as questions come up, feel free to put them in the chat.
Awesome. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Let me know if anyone's having any trouble seeing that. Yeah, thanks so much, Jen, for the introduction. I am so excited to be talking with you all today about the educational checklist for students with CHARGE syndrome. This is a tool that I developed as part of my master's thesis in my graduate program, and I try to get the word out about it as much as possible. The reason that we developed this was to serve as a tool for parents to make the school transition a little bit easier. So I'm really, really excited to talk to you all. This is one of the best parts about the research I do, is being able to collaborate so closely with families and parents. It makes my life so much fun. So thank you all for coming and taking time out of your day to listen to this. So to start off, just to give you a brief overview of the checklist before I dive more into it. The checklist is basically a tool for parents to bring to school teams to educate them on CHARGE syndrome and provide them with some recommendations that they can use to best service your child. It's meant as a starting point for conversations with the teams, but it's kind of meant to consolidate all of these professional recommendations that are floating around on the internet into one place so that educators can kind of get up to speed quickly about CHARGE syndrome. So today I will briefly talk about the rationale for why we developed this checklist. I will briefly touch on how we went about developing it, and the bulk of the presentation will be discussing the checklist itself, how you can use the checklist, and there'll also be some time for discussion at the end, which I'm really looking forward to. So starting with the rationale for the checklist, we know that CHARGE is really low incidence, and we know that it's really complex, and individuals with CHARGE have all different combinations of characteristics and severities, making it really, there's no one-size-fits-all intervention for kids with CHARGE. And because it's so low incidence and complex, educators likely don't fully understand CHARGE and all the complexities that come with it. And furthermore, a lot of times when a student with CHARGE starts at a school, they might be the first student with CHARGE that school has ever had. So there's really not a lot of background in CHARGE unless you're going to a more specialized school that gets more kids with CHARGE would go to. And the big reason why we developed this checklist is we heard over and over from parents that they are constantly advocating for their children at school, but educators often are not listening to them, or they're not valuing their input as a team member. And unfortunately, a lot of times educators don't take the input of parents as much as we would like. I'm trained as a school psychologist, so in my work, in my work in the schools and in my work through the CHARGE community, the number one lesson that I've learned is that it's so important to listen to the parents. You are all the experts on your child, and you're just a wealth of information, and it's so important that your voice is heard on the team. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. And unfortunately, sometimes professionals will listen more to other professionals. So we wanted to make a tool that could empower parents that's pretty much going to say the exact same thing that you've been advocating for, but it's backed by professional recommendations, which unfortunately sometimes makes the difference in educators taking recommendations seriously. So that's kind of why we decided to take on this project. It was also inspired by the CHARGE syndrome checklist health supervision across the lifespan, which is a medical checklist developed for medical professionals. I'll show in this next slide. I realize this will be difficult to see, but it provides different medical characteristics that providers should screen for at different points of life. And I heard about this tool in 2017 at a charge conference, and I thought that this would be a really great tool to adapt for the schools to consolidate information and just guide school teams in the direction to see these kids as a whole and kind of have on their radar different things that they should be aware of, because since charge is so complex, there's a lot of things that could easily get left behind or not addressed, which is not ideal. So after seeing this checklist, that kind of became my inspiration moving forward. So to actually develop the checklist, we had a lot of help. First and foremost, I did a pretty extensive literature search to see what professionals are recommending about education in charge. I also had a lot of help from the Charge Syndrome Research Lab at Central Michigan University, which is led by Tim Hartshorn, who is an international expert in charge and a parent of a 31-year-old with charge. I also had a lot of help from our panel of experts with David Brown, Beth Kennedy, Rob Last, Jude Nicholas, Nancy Salem Hartshorn, and Casey Stratton. This is an interdisciplinary group of experts ranging from people who worked at the Deafblind projects to special education teachers, to parents, to school psychologists, to neuropsychologists. So we had a really good range of professionals who've had a lot of experience working with kids with charge or in kids with deafblindness in the schools. We also got feedback from a select group of parents, professionals with experience working with charge, and state Deafblind project employees. So we had a lot of different collaborators on this to try to make it the best product that it could be. And I want to say now that I see this tool as something that should be constantly evolving to reflect everything that we're learning about charge. Charge is still a relatively new syndrome that we learn so much about every year. So I always welcome feedback to change things about the checklist, to add things. So if you ever, at any point, either today or down the road, think of something that you think would help improve the checklist, please send it my way, because I think that's the best way to make sure that we are reflecting the needs of parents and individuals with charge. So that was briefly how we developed the checklist. Moving into the checklist itself, because that's why we're here. It's the bulk of the presentation. So the checklist consists of an introductory page, which I will describe more in depth in the next couple slides. The actual physical checklist itself, which consists of 5 categories or columns, 27 characteristics and concerns that are common to students with charge, which are grouped into 5 subsections or domains. It consists of a glossary, which on one hand explains the educational jargon with the different team members and different words that might be unfamiliar to parents who are just starting out with the school system. And it also explains all of the charge jargon, which educational professionals are likely not familiar with either. So it's kind of meant to make this readable for both parents and professionals. And then it has a selected reference list for some of the most pivotal resources that we use in developing the checklist. And that would be really, really important for professionals to read and look into moving forward. So going a little bit more into the introductory page, it first provides an overview of charge, and this is a really brief paragraph that kind of just talks about the main diagnostic criteria of charge and how it's diagnosed. And then it talks more in depth about the 5 educationally relevant domains of charge, which are kind of the 5 areas that I conceptualize being the most impactful when we think about charge. So it kind of gives a broad overview of these are the 5 areas that school teams should be thinking about when they're educating a student with charge. And then it provides an overview of the checklist and how they should use it. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about the domains. And as parents, while you likely already know these domains, I thought it would be helpful for me to go a little bit more in depth on them, just so you can have a general framework about how these areas might be impacted for your child, and how you might want to talk about these areas with your school team, or areas that you might be able to identify, like, ooh, that area doesn't actually seem to be addressed by my child's IEP. I might want to ask them to do more accommodations in that area. So first off, with the medical domain, as you know, kids with charge are often in and out of the hospital for the first several years of their life, undergoing numerous hospitalizations, surgeries, and procedures. And these often require long hospital stays and recovery periods. And so there's a really key piece of early development that is just being spent in the hospital, and that has a big impact on development and availability to learn and access education. And beyond that, a lot of kids have ongoing medical concerns, which continue to reduce their ability to either be physically present at school or mentally present. So whether that is missing a week of school for a medical procedure, or being in having chronic pain and not being able to focus because of that, the medical concerns are really significant, and they can really tax students' ability to focus at school. Additionally, with the ongoing medical concerns, the school teams are often going to be playing at least some role in managing these medical concerns at school. So it's really important that school teams understand the medical histories of these kids, and what role the school team is playing in addressing those needs currently. And just understanding the impact of this medical piece. So what is the impact of missing a couple days every couple months at school? It can be pretty significant. So it's up to the school team to be able to address that in a meaningful way, so that your child is still accessing educational materials. So that's just something that's really fundamental, especially in the younger years when they are having more frequent medical interventions. And next is sensory. So we know that kids with charge have a varying degree of sensory loss, and pretty much every single sensory system can be impacted. So their vision, their hearing, their sense of taste, their sense of smell, their sense of touch, their proprioception, or their understanding of where their body is in space, and their vestibular sense, so their ability to balance and focus their head. So the impact of this multiple sensory loss is really profound, especially because schools and the world in general are really not set up for people who don't have fully functioning senses. So most school activities are set up for people who can see and hear and taste and touch and smell and balance properly. But when we have students who they're not working at 100% capacity for each of those, it makes it a lot harder for them to access the educational material. And that's the school team's job, to compensate for that and provide them with additional sensory information, so they are able to access the different educational curriculums and materials. And it's really important for them to maximize sensory input, because there's a lot of holes in the information that kids with charge are missing, because they just don't have, they're not working at 100% vision or 100% hearing. And I think that can be hard sometimes for school teams to understand the impact of the multiple sensory loss. Sometimes schools have the tendency to focus on just one sensory loss at a time instead of focusing on, okay, how does this work all together? So for example, they might they might be focusing on doing an assignment where the kids are encouraged to smell or taste a certain food, not knowing that a child with charge might not be able to smell or taste anything at all. So they're not accessing that activity. So there needs to be numerous different accommodations to make sure that these students are accessing the education. Next, communication. So communication is also impacted by multiple sensory loss, and it's also impacted by structural anomalies, so such as corneal atresia or cleft lip and palate. This can make it really difficult for kids with charge to express themselves. And one of the first priorities at the school should be to establish a common communication system and really meet your child where they're at and build upon their existing communication system and broaden it so that they can communicate with more people. And this is what we call a total communication system. And what that means is taking as many possible different ways of communicating as possible and putting them all together and using them so your child can expand their communication repertoire. So this means using things like spoken language, sign language, pictures, touch cues, interpreting their behavior as communication, as many different ways to communicate as possible. We want to give those options to your child so they can pick and choose which way is most helpful for them in that moment and build on it moving forward. If there's no common communication system, it's going to be really difficult to further education. Next is developmental. So kids with charge often have global developmental delays. This is due to the time spent in the hospital early in life, the multiple sensory loss, and again, the structural anomalies such as low muscle tone or the cleft lip. With these global delays, something that I always really like to stress when working with professionals is that these are delays and that these kids are capable of so much when given resources and when given access to the environment. So something that I know parents are always advocating, but is so important, is that we should always expect really high things from these students because they are capable of a lot when they are provided with the access to do so. So it's important that these developmental delays be seen as delays that can be addressed instead of a really poor prognosis, because these kids really they need access to the educational material, and once they do, we see really great growth. And then next is behavioral. So a lot of kids with charge exhibit some pretty challenging behaviors. There is a behavioral phenotype that Tim Hartshorn came up with, which I won't go into depth about right now. But a lot of times we'll see aggressive behaviors, repetitive behaviors, a lot of sensation seeking, which depending on the school team can be viewed really negatively. And a lot of times when we see behaviors that we don't really want, we kind of think they're annoying and we want to get rid of them. Whereas a lot of times, especially when kids are just learning how to communicate, their behavior is the only way that they know how to communicate with the world. So if we try to just shut off that behavior, we're also shutting off a mode of communication. So while it's important to keep our kids safe and to make sure that they're not harming themselves or others, it's also really important that we are giving them other ways of communicating without hurting themselves. So that's generally the domains that I think of when I think of how charge impacts students educationally. Here is a picture of what the first page of the checklist looks like. It kind of is just the written version of what I just mentioned. So then the overview of the checklist. I won't go into too much depth here. Basically, these are the different 5 columns in the checklist. So the first are characteristics and concerns, and these are the educationally relevant characteristics and concerns that are commonly exhibited by students with charge. So it's just a list of 27 different characteristics and concerns. And then next are educational or support needs, and this is what the student needs if they have that specific characteristic and concern. So what does the school need to do to accommodate that specific need? Team members are the IEP members who will likely be involved in the day-to-day service delivery to address those specific needs. Examples of strategies and accommodations. These are meant to be a starting point for some professional recommendations for how to support those specific needs that these students might have. And then finally, consulting professionals are professionals outside of the school who the school might consider consulting with when accommodating that specific need. And again, this is just a picture of what it looks like in the checklist. It's basically exactly what I just said. And just to give a little bit more reference, here is what the first page of the checklist looks like. So as you can see on the top, we have the different categories, and then in the first column we have the different characteristics and concerns. This is just 5 of them of the 27, and these characteristics are grouped into the medical domain, and we'll see more moving on. So this is just the layout of the checklist. I wanted to draw your attention to the team members column. Under that, we have that parents, special and general educators, and interveners should be consulted in most areas, because those are really pivotal team members that would basically be listed in every single box. And parents, I just can't stress enough that you are an extremely valuable team member, and I hope that all of your teams see you as that. But just, if you need to hear that, you are valuable and you have so much to bring to the table. And I want you to always feel like you are a member of that team, and you're not someone that just attends the meetings, because you should be involved in this entire process. This is your child, and you know more about your child than any of the other individuals sitting at the table. And I also wanted to mention for the consulting professionals that the State Deafblind Project should be consulted in most areas. The Deafblind projects are such an excellent resource for parents and professionals. The Deafblind projects have such a wealth of information about how to support these kids at school, and they can be really, really valuable team members to have at IEPs, just to kind of reinforce the message that you're saying, and just to provide more resources. So I highly recommend, if you haven't had the Deafblind projects involved in your child's school so far, I highly recommend it. I can't speak highly enough of the Deafblind projects. I think they are so excellent and just such an important resource.
Lily, there's
Yes.
a comment in the chat box. It's this comment says, we moved to Batavia, Illinois because of the support for special needs children. We are really happy about that decision. The school has provided our now 15-year-old child with support devices to help him hear and see, educational tools, and a dedicated aide to ensure he gets the best education possible. Sean tested positive in a DNA test for charge early on. He has many challenges, but we are so blessed with the support from BPS 101. We highly recommend this district for any child with special needs, but especially those with unique conditions like charge.
That's awesome. I'm so happy that you found a district that is really meeting your family's needs, and I think it's it's unfortunate sometimes that families have to move to get that kind of specialized care, but I'm really happy that you're getting really good comprehensive care, because and I'm sure you've seen such growth in your son since then. It's you know, it makes such a difference when you have a team approach to things instead of just working on things in isolation. So I'm just going to go briefly into kind of walk us through a couple of the main or the most common characteristics and concerns. And again, feel free to jump in if you want me to elaborate on anything more. I'd be happy to take this in whatever direction you want. I will try to go through these somewhat quickly so we have plenty of time for discussion. So the first that I wanted to go over in the medical domain is feeding issues. And feeding issues are extremely common in students with charge, affecting up to 95% of individuals with charge based on various estimates. So if, and I guess I should have mentioned how this checklist works. If you see there's the column with the check at the top. How I envision this working is parents will take the checklist and check off the characteristics that their child exhibits to narrow it down so that the school team knows where to draw their attention. So if your child has feeding issues, you would just check that off, and then you would know that row applies to your child. So the educational or support needs that come from feeding issues is the school team needs to predetermine a schedule and location of feeding to ensure that it's safe and hygienic. They also need to have an understanding of issues with chewing and swallowing, and they also need to be trained in the specific mode of feeding. And that is a really great place where the consulting professionals can come in, especially if you're getting any sort of feeding therapies outside of school. It is always a good idea, in my opinion, to have as much collaboration across settings as possible. So if you're consulting with your primary care physician, a medical specialist, a dietitian, or if they're getting specific feeding therapy outside of school, definitely try to see if those professionals can do a training of the school team members, or at least like do a meeting to get everyone up to speed. I think it's really, really great in terms of like cohesiveness of services. So team members at school that might be involved in addressing feeding issues could include a nurse, lunch staff, speech language pathologist, behavior consultant, and occupational therapist. And feeding goals are actually something that can be written into the IEP. So a lot of times kids with charge might see an SLP for both feeding and for speech and articulation and language. Some examples of strategies and accommodations could include feeding therapy, cutting food into small bites, and training staff on feeding. So parents, how this column is supposed to work is you could suggest these things to the school team, or just providing it to them might get their wheels turning on different things that they can, different strategies they can use to accommodate your child's needs. All right, next is ocular defects or vision loss. So colobomas are really common in kids with charge, leading to some degree of vision loss. And the need that comes from this is access to the visual environment. So your child needs to be able to access the visual world. It's really important for school teams to understand functional vision and also understand the risk of retinal detachment, which is more common in kids with charge. They need to be familiar with equipment management for vision loss, understanding of light sensitivity, and understanding of your child's visual field. And then team members here will likely include a teacher consultant for the visually impaired and a certified orientation and mobility specialist. And some strategies that you might look for here are having an updated functional vision assessment. It's really important to have those on a yearly basis because vision can change really rapidly. It's also important to have a learning media assessment, so figuring out what equipment your child uses and how they use it, making environmental accommodations such as large print, braille, angled work surfaces, considering lighting and minimizing visual clutter, ensuring that glasses are being consistently worn, and establishment of a communication bubble, which is it determines the area around your child in which they can most readily access communication and they can most access visual information. So for example, if their visual field loss is an upper visual field loss, it would be really important for schools to make sure that they are presenting information in the lower visual field. So it's just really important because a lot of times these things can be really easy to forget for school staff because you're not the one with the vision loss. So you might not be used to presenting information in a very specific location. So it's really important that everyone's on the same page with that. And then consulting professionals might include your child's ophthalmologist, optometrist, low vision specialist, and the state deafblind projects. Okay, auditory issues and ear abnormalities, which again are extremely common in kids with charge at the inner, middle, and outer ear level, leading to a varying degree of hearing loss. So the support need here is access to the auditory environment, similarly to the vision loss. It's really important for team members to understand the degree and type of hearing loss, and again, manage the equipment for hearing loss and manage it consistently across the school day. Team members here will likely include a teacher consultant for the hearing impaired. And for examples of strategies, a functional hearing assessment, which again, it's important to do those pretty regularly because again, hearing can change pretty rapidly. Offering assistive technologies such as amplification systems and hearing aids. And again, it's really important to do that consistently across the school day, especially as kids get older and go to middle school or high school and they're changing classrooms. We've heard from some older adults with charge that some of their classroom teachers just didn't have the FM system set up, and it can be really hard sometimes when you're a middle or high school student to advocate for yourself, and no one wants to feel different at those times. So if you know, it's really important that these systems just be set up in advance, because it shouldn't be your child's responsibility to make sure that their accommodations are in place. That's the responsibility of the school team.
I hope you don't mind, Lily, but the previous topic that you were in, there was a comment about that.
Okay.
Well, actually, and maybe I'm wrong, it says, the comment is, this is an area I'm concerned about. My son will be starting 8th grade, and when he eats via mouth. He is very messy and very open-mouthed. I'm concerned this will start to affect him more in social situations in school. Always passes this over. Well, the school always passes this over.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that would be something that you'd be concerned about. And I think that's a great example of where you can really push for that to be something that they include in the IEP. I think that is a totally reasonable IEP goal that they can work on. They can work on teaching, like they can work on like reducing messiness of eating. There's lots of things that they can do there, especially if that's something that's really important to you and to him. I think something else that could be helpful there, which I'll kind of touch on, I think, in a couple slides, is I'm a really big fan of like class-wide interventions and involving peers. And I think that could be a good opportunity to teach some peers on about charge and why it might be a little bit more difficult for him to eat, and kind of get their understanding up. So he has kind of a group of people who understand why that's happening, that can kind of be his buddies and kind of stick up for him if other people are being not nice about it, because yeah, middle school is not a nice time, and kids kids notice when people are doing things different than them. So I think doing positive, like inclusive strategies at a school-wide level or a class-wide level is going to be really important there. And I've got some recommendations, I think, in a couple slides, and when we talk about social skills that we can look back on, and we can definitely talk about that during the discussion part too.
Okay. And there's another question regarding when this tool would be used. Do you want to hear that now or later?
Yeah, we can do that now.
Okay. Do you recommend bringing this to an IEP? What we have found is that our IEPs are already 3 to 5 hours long because of complexities of our child and the large amount of goals. I think all the items here are great and critical to discuss, but it's hard to find the time to gather everyone for a large amount of time to discuss. Do you have any suggestions for this?
Yes, and I think that is an extremely valid point. IEPs are so long already, and if we're getting into the nitty-gritty of all of this, that can make them last even longer. What I think it would be best is not to bring I don't envision this as being brought to for the first time just to the IEP meeting. I think it would be ideal if like once a read is signed, or once the schools begin their reevaluation or their initial evaluation, I think that is a really good time to give it to the school team so that they can be incorporating that in their planning phases and in their assessment phases. So because a lot of times when you get to the IEP, it is unfortunately pretty much already made and put together. So if the professionals have this ahead of time, they can incorporate that into what they are doing before you even get to the table. And then you can hopefully then they would have had time to look through it and have already or they would have already started to pick from those strategies. And then you can kind of touch back on the ones that maybe you want them to focus more on. So I see this more as like a team training happening at like the beginning of the year, or when you're starting out a new team, or when you want to revisit a topic, rather than bringing it to the IEP meeting for the first time, if that makes sense.
One more comment. When you mentioned that vision and hearing can change rapidly, thus needing assessments frequently, can you expand on that?
Yeah, so for vision, and feel free anyone else to jump in if I'm speaking out of line here, but I know for vision, like risk of retinal detachment, that can be something that can change vision pretty quickly. And with hearing, I think it depends on the individual, but sometimes hearing does change throughout development. And I think especially with charge, I think there's different specific characteristics that would lend them more likely to change over time. So it's just, in general, we need to have a really good understanding of what the level of vision and hearing is at any given moment. And there are different environmental factors that can lead to changing vision and hearing. So it's important to stay on top of that. So another example is if your child exhibits a lot of self-injurious behavior in which there's a lot of like eye gouging or head hitting, that can reduce vision over time due to risk of retinal detachment. So that's those are the situations that I'm referring to. And I want to just acknowledge that that is definitely outside of my immediate expertise. I know a little bit about that, but consulting with like an ENT or audiologist or ophthalmologist is definitely the way to go for more information about that. I know when I was at Cincinnati Children's, Dr. Chu would talk about some specific situations in which hearing could decrease. But yeah, that's the extent that I know about it. I don't know the nitty gritty.
I can jump in unless Becky wants to, as someone like with I'm a teacher of the visually impaired, and I have had students who have had retinal detachments, and some of them have had Charge syndrome, but I've also had family members who don't have an etiology of Charge or other additional needs who've had retinal detachment. So I think it's just, you know, always wise to be on the lookout for any one of us for things like, you know, eye redness, or depending on your child's language system, if they talk about stars in their eyes, or a curtain coming down, things like that. Those are all signals of eye emergency. You'd want to contact your eye doctor immediately. And, you know, it's just good, you know, part of a good health regime for your vision.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for jumping in there. Am I good to go on, or are there other comments?
In our here, let's see. Hi, I'm wondering if the vision loss or getting better. I'm wondering if there's vision loss or better while developing. I guess like could it get better, or could it get worse, or could it get better just due to development?
Again, that's a little bit outside of my area. What I do know is that as kids get older, they can develop more adaptive ways of using their residual vision or hearing more efficiently for themselves. So especially as they learn to walk and maneuver themselves around the environment, they're able to position themselves in ways such that they can access the visual environment better, just because they have more autonomy over and more control about how they're positioning themselves. And I think that's probably going to be on an individual basis about the specific trajectory of vision, whether it's improving or declining.
And that person had a follow-up comment saying, okay, and for deaf, getting worse while developing as I do. And then there's an additional comment from another person saying, in our area, they recommended a low vision eval every 3 years, unless you think there's been a big change.
Okay. Yeah, and I think I've heard every year, but that might be on the more ideal side of things. It might not be as realistic to get that every year. And again, that might vary on a person-to-person basis on if it is indicated or not. A lot of the things in the checklist are things that are like, in an ideal world, if there was no limits, this would be great. And always adapting that to the needs of your child is going to be the way to go. Were there any other questions?
That's it for now.
Okay. So I think I left off at the medical interventions. So of course the school team is not going to be providing medical interventions for the auditory issues, but they can be making sure that the student is wearing them consistently. So wearing their cochlear, wearing their Baha. Minimizing auditory distractions is going to be important. So making sure there's not loud noise or loud background noises around, so they can really focus on the material at hand. And then providing sign language as well. And then, so deaf blindness, while I've talked about vision loss and hearing loss separately, I think it's always really important to talk about the combined sensory loss, because it really makes a big difference. Students who have vision and hearing loss, they are not as easily able to rely on their other sense to supplement information that they're losing. And that's really, really important to get across to school teams, because they're not just deaf and blind, they're deaf blind. And that really, the effect of that really multiplies. It doesn't just add deaf and blind. So it's really important here to, the educational need is access to the environment, because again, the world is not set up for people who have vision and hearing loss. It's important for school teams to understand the complexity of the combined vision and hearing loss. And it's also really important for them to have knowledge of deafblind specific interventions. So doing research into interventions that are specifically geared towards students who are deafblind. Team members here are teacher of the deafblind and an intervener. And if you don't know about interveners, they're specially trained paraprofessionals who work one-on-one with students who are deafblind. They're trained in deafblindness, and they work to provide access and increase independence for students who are deafblind. And unfortunately, they're not legally required in any state, and the access of interveners really varies from state to state based on how many trained interveners there are. But there are really great intervener training modules on National Center of Deafblindness' website. And so even if you don't have a formally trained intervener, there are modules that your school team could go through to get up to speed on deafblindness, which I would highly recommend. Some examples of strategies and accommodations are to simultaneously address the impact of visual and hearing loss. So sometimes we see that professionals, when if you have a TCVI working on vision loss and TCHI working on hearing loss, it's important to make sure that those professionals are talking and that they're on the same page with what's being worked on, and if possible, working on some similar targets to make sure that they're going hand in hand. It's important to make information available through multiple sensory systems, and using direct instruction is extremely important. For people with typically developing senses, we learn a lot through incidentally. So we learn a lot just from observing in our environment, but students who are deafblind they're not accessing that information. So they really need to be taught directly and explicitly. Otherwise, they might be missing out on a lot of that information. In the interest of time, just to make sure we have time for discussion at the end, I might skip through, or I'll try to just briefly give an overview on each topic instead of going through on each of these specific columns. For posture, what's really important here is a lot of kids with charge need to be sitting in atypical postures compared to other children. So a lot of really common charge postures are sitting like this with their hand on their head, lying on their side, or lying upside down. And a lot of times school teams try to stop that, and they try to change that, which is really not great for the student, because a lot of times these postures are the postures that they've discovered that help stabilize their vision and help maximize their attentional capacity. So it's really, really important to let your child sit how they please, because a lot of times that's actually helping them access the educational materials. So I think here the big thing is just following your child's lead and letting them recharge for a little bit and lie upside down. Because a lot of times that's a way of just stabilizing themselves and centering themselves, and doing that for 10 minutes a day might very well help them be able to focus for a longer period of time. And then motor, this is another area that is important to focus on. So doing mobility assessments and teaching independent mobility is a really important functional skill, and it really helps increase independence. There's some research to suggest that students who walk earlier end up also faring better in terms of communication. And it's thought to be that once you're able to independently move, you're able to have more control over your environment. So you're able to just have more autonomy there and put yourself in situations in which you can maximize your sensory input. So those are also really important IEP goals, is focusing on the motor piece of things and increasing independence in whatever way possible. And then communication, I will talk about receptive and expressive together. Expressive is on the next slide. And I mentioned this when I was talking about the communication domain in general. It's really the most important thing here is to use a total communication approach and meet your child where they're at and expand on their what they're already doing, and making sure you're giving them as many different ways of communicating as possible. And it's also really important to, I think, parents, this is where you can definitely insist that the school is doing whatever you're doing at home, because you probably know all of your child's cues down to a T. And there's probably a lot of systems that you're using at home that even if they're not formal systems, there's things that you're doing at home that are allowing you and your child to communicate. And as much consistency as we can have across home and school, the better it's going to be for your child, because they're learning that communicating in one setting is going to get you the same result as the other. So it's really important to be consistent. That'll make it a lot easier on your child. And then behavior. So here, I think, again, it's important to interpret behavior as communication and not try to eliminate a behavior before you understand what they're communicating with it. And certainly there are some behaviors that we need to try to reduce, such as self-injurious behavior or aggressive behavior towards others. But it's important to always give them another way of communicating if you're taking away that avenue. So it could be helpful to push for a functional behavior assessment. What that means is the school team would look at what things are happening before, during, and after the behavior that might be contributing to it. And then they can make some environmental changes to try to make that behavior increase or decrease. And I think here it's really important, if you know specific pain behaviors of your child, communicating those to the school team so they can really know what to look for, because sometimes they just might not know. So I think this is another way that it's important to be consistent across home and school, and like really be communicating about what those different behaviors mean for your child. This is just a brief picture of what the glossary looks like. That's more so just for reference. And then the selected reference list, which I'll just skip past. And then actually using the checklist. So we've already kind of talked about this a little bit when answering a previous question. I think that this is really great to provide to the school team as early as you can to start including it in the conversation. A lot of school professionals that I've been involved with have really been excited about this tool because they want to learn more about charge, but a lot of times they just don't have the time to be able to search the internet for all of this information that's in all these different places. So this should be a reasonably helpful tool because it takes all of it together into one space, and they have also access to other resources if needed. So providing it to your school team to kind of get everyone on the same page could be a good way to start the conversation. And going along with that, I think it's a really good idea to make an about your child's name PowerPoint where you kind of go over the highlights. So how I see that is after you've checked off the checklist and said, okay, these are the characteristics that my child has, you can make a PowerPoint and for reference for the team, and that can be another way of just getting the conversation going and making it really child-centered. You can also use this to learn about different accommodations for your child. I think, especially when you're just starting off, it's not possible at all for you to know absolutely everything about special education and the different services that are available. And as parents, you already have so much on your plate with managing all of the different medical characteristics of your child. So I hope that this can be a tool for you as well in terms of learning about what the different school professionals do and how they can service your child and what is out there in terms of services, what is within your rights to ask for. And I think that this can also just be good to use when advocating for your child. You are constantly advocating for your child in every setting that they're in. And I hope that this can be used as a way to kind of strengthen your voice and just kind of back up what you're already asking for. So that's kind of how I envision this being used. I really see it as a tool that helps facilitate a really strong working relationship between the school team and parents. And just really quickly, my next step, I'm collecting data for my dissertation. I'm looking at educational outcomes of individuals with charge. So I have a survey that I'm looking at different characteristics of the educational settings that students are in, and I'm also collecting IEPs. I'm currently collecting data. I would love anyone to participate who is interested. I've been posting about it on the Facebook page. If you haven't seen it, you can feel free to send me an email, and I'd be happy to send you the information about it. This will really help me know how to better how to improve the checklist, and also how to better support families and individuals with charge moving forward. So that kind of wraps up my presentation. I think that we can move into question and answer. And I also have a couple discussion points that I'd love to chat about. So I'd love to hear about what your experiences are with your school teams, whether they're good or bad, what your satisfaction is with your child's IEPs, and also what you wish professionals understood about your child.
There's one comment here, and there's a suggestion that BCBA would be a good acronym to add with behavior consultant.
Okay. Yes.
And then another, can you share how this presentation was different when you presented it to professionals, in quotes, versus parents? I'm curious how the information changed for different audiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first, I will definitely add BCBA to the acronym. I guess that's it. Kind of makes me laugh that I didn't put that in there, because I'm actually pursuing my BCBA, so I seem to forget my own profession when making this. So that's a great suggestion. When I present this to professionals, I do more of a background on charge. I skipped over all of that because there's nothing about charge that I could tell parents that they don't already know. So I do more of a background there, and in the professional presentation, I really try to emphasize the importance of deferring to the parents' expertise, because I just think that's probably the number one takeaway that if I were to want the professionals to walk away with one thing, it would be that, because that's just such a big thing that I hear from parents, is that they're not listened to by the school team, and that's just it's sad. And I think that it's it makes it so much easier when there's open communication. I pretty much I use the same slides, so I just kind of tailor it a little bit differently in how I talk about it. So I pretty much tell the professionals, like, oh, this is, parents might bring this to you, or you can use this as a starting point for developing services, but I want this to be a really open conversation. I want you to be working with your school teams to really tailor it to the needs of the specific student, and it's really important to work in collaboration with the parents and basically the entire school team. So yeah, it's a very similar presentation. It's just a little bit more tailored to, I go a little bit more in depth in the specific like professional recommendations. I might talk a little bit more there, but other than that, it's pretty similar.
And Lily, this is Jen. I'm just going to add, we chose to do 2 different presentations, mainly just to give the families and the parents an opportunity to come on and ask questions in a little bit smaller of a group without service providers or teachers present with them. And so that was part of our rationale for asking Lily to do 2 different presentations. All right, unfortunately, we are out of time. We just want to say thank you for taking the time out of your evening tonight to attend this presentation. We hope that you found it to be beneficial. If you have any additional questions or need support with this checklist or any other topic related to deafblindness, please reach out to any one of us or to your state deafblind project, which is always a resource too. Thank you guys very much for coming tonight, and thank you, Lily, for taking the time to share your resource and knowledge with us. Good night.